Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well, and especially under the stress of these times. And of course, reading the news always does a trip. Nonetheless, I hope everybody is doing well. I have a question from Deborah Olashansky, and I'll read it. Well, let me read it first. You have mentioned the story of Samson a few times in the past months, so I went back to review. I noticed that in the images, some show him pushing the pillars out, and some show him pulling the pillars inward. These are images that people have of what might have happened. So I went back to the original Hebrew, and that translates as he leaned upon the pillars, one with his right hand and the other with his left. As a metaphor and on an energetic level, is there different relevance or importance if it is leaning upon the pillars, push the pillars, or pull the pillars? Interesting question. You have to remember that this is a very profound belief metaphor. To start off, I just like to say that usually what happens is that we have understandings that get turned upside down. And the relationship with these understandings, in other words, we make sense of it because there are so many options. And what we do is we have one option relating to the personality, another relating to a higher state. And if you can see both these hands, and really we stick the higher state, we believe, in a position and place. But unfortunately, what happens is it's our personality that, and it's many intellectual options that attempt to make sense of things. And in spite of our great and wondrous attempts, we tend to come up with various commentaries that align themselves in positions to protect our beliefs. It's how we all do things. If I like a certain car, I set up a number of pieces of information that will protect my liking of a certain car. Beliefs are profound because throughout the ages, there have been various links with higher states that help us to try and understand things. And there have been brilliant, intelligent people that have tried to make sense of things. Both of those things are quite natural and normal, and we'll continue to do this kind of thing with respect to any belief, both biblical and secular. So here's another, and let's say an option. When I look at this metaphor, it reminds me tremendously of the Garden of Eden metaphor. Without any doubt, it helps me to consider three options that we have as individuals that relate to internal spiritual development, one could say. One could call it. Most of you know that I have often talked about chakras or Zephyroth in terms of the ability to link up in a way that's a little broader than how a personality would discuss and describe what they're reading. We're in the learning phases of doing that, and our emphasis still is primarily on the feature of a personality that we call intellect. And we profess and we attempt to construct mental systems that try to make sense of the world, nature, the nature of the world, and the world of nature. I've always considered the possibility that the nature of a human being is in its youthful stages. And images like the Garden of Eden are trying to show us this, number one. An image that where with Adam and Eve was also linked up so that she could actually perceive what God said to her. Don't eat of the apple. Don't eat of the matter plane. But there is a stage beyond the Garden of Eden where God goes, number one stage. Second stage, a stage where a link up can occur between a higher state and that state. And then there is another state below in a form that relates primarily to a persona or a number of personas, personality, one could say. Adam had a personality, relatively speaking. He was kind of numbed out in a bit because he was a prototype, a form that had to follow a structural system so that those who were in the matter world could begin to be helped or linked towards being in a semi-state related to the God plane, something like Moses became able to talk to the burning bush. And the same thing is true in the Samson orientation, but it's a little harder to figure out, maybe not for many. When you start thinking in metaphors, there are some that slip by, and you can't quite figure them out, but your intellect will play a game. And the game is, I will try to figure it out from my perspective. That's a decent game. It's reasonable. You know the story of Adam and Eve. In theory, they begin to eat of the matter world. They take in a kind of knowledge, the knowledge of the apple being worth while eating, one could say. One kind of semi-rendering to make it short. And they begin to have to use their system to be okay with digesting the apple. A small little thing. Except that it drops them into a plane lower than the plane that they are in the Garden of Eden. That zone where the higher state, remember, and a form can be, but at the same time, still relative to the matter world. It's very strange, but once you get into the matter world, you start engaging with that world with a constructed system internally. Adam lives for a huge number of years, but during that time he has some sons or progeny, and over time they begin to mix with those who never had an opportunity to engage with a higher state because they were primarily of the lower state. So there is a blending of this capacity that Adam has through his progeny into the other forms that did not have it, according to semi-view of the story. So we became, as human beings, uh, involved with the context, possible context, a potential, so-called, where you could engage with a state that linked up beyond what is still relatively normal, but um, broader than it ever was before, because our capacities to learn about how nature is, fly planes, cars, whatever. Yet we still are dependent upon the limits and beliefs that we have around with respect to functioning on these planes. And we will, in a kind of a funny way, possibly by looking at some of these very fascinating images, metaphors, perhaps one day begin to realize that we are much more than that, and perhaps be able to handle it outside the limits of the material plane's versionings of self-importance. Perhaps, maybe we'll never get there. I like to hope that we will. But Samson, as well as a number of other stories, is a very interesting story because he is pulled by the matter world into a relationship with a person, Delilah, and she is kind of interested in the fact that it's like the Garden of Eden story all over again. I don't, except depending on how you look at it, you can blame Eve. I don't see that as a blaming. Maybe that's heresy. But I don't see that as a blaming. I see that as a helping of Adam didn't know how to get lower. He needed help to get into the realm of the lower engagement with matter so that the matter world could be helped. That's the relationship with love of a higher state. It wants the lower state to be filled with a sense of knowing that there is such a thing as a higher state. One could say. That's one argument, of course. So Samson has a real dilemma. He feels the pull of those lower Zephyrot. They're stimulated. Delilah is a representative of a form called beauty, a form called, in a kind of a way, that pulls towards linking. And of course, Samson, in his normal, natural state, is linked up with a higher state. He is a practitioner of the temple. He runs the temple. Yet, he is the temple and doesn't know it. When he's in that state, he is linking with God, one could say. Linking with the temple that is constructed for the worship of the higher state. And whilst you are in there, you are ordained to be involved with that higher state. It is a captive form of the Garden of Eden. It's an image, a structure, a relationship. Relationship is vital in the sense that love is on a continuum that has many levels. It has the levels of the matter plane, which is natural and normal, and levels of where one could say the Garden of Eden would be, where one can talk to God but step back into the other plane, thanks to Adam and Eve. And now And the snake, by the way, very interesting thing, the snake of wisdom, one could say, according to the Greeks, according to the Hindus, the Buddhists, almost every other place except um, uh, our bad mouthing of the snake, because we know some that bite, and that's not good for us. But the snake of wisdom, in that it knew, it was engaged with God as well and knew the plan of God. Now that is definitely heresy. But to know the plan of God and partake in it is not a small thing. Samson, in his way of knowing, is linked in that Garden of Eden territory. He's a wondrously helpful being and has been tremendously powerful and capable with respect to the will of that altered plane, but also in the paradigm, in the engagement with the sense of power and capability of the physical, emotional, mental. And so he is a gloriously powerful image that robust is a better word, image that shows the expression of a oneness from the view of the lower system as worthy of this great penetration into a kind of relative oneness that relates to the lower planes. And so he's a hero. And he is a hero in the sense that if one aligns with the belief, with the understanding, with the expression, the engagement, with the tones of the temple, expressions of the temple, you will become at least involved with that same linkage. That is a kind of a profound statement. You will become a part of the I am, that I am. That I am, that I am. That two levels joining together, and it will move energy up and stimulate not only the lower systems, but engage with and activate the upper systems for the purpose of engaging with a much higher state, as opposed to the idealization, or the idolization of the lower construct, the personality, because it's recognized as being smart, being strong, being emotionally calm and wise. That's how we see things. We tend to see it this way. But we do not know what it's really like until we are in it. And then we find out we have it upside down. It wasn't a judgment of others who were bad or good. It was an understanding of the occurrence of a life form in a context that was relatively positioned where they were in the movement of a process to gain access to another level, where they were along a continuum. This was not understood even like that, and I would just say that we probably don't really understand this very well yet. But in the old traditions, there were three pillars. The pillar of you, and the two other pillars, and these were related to this temple in Jerusalem. the other two pillars, and it meant the ones on the side, energy on the side was flowing upward. Energy up through the middle was flowing upward, and they were blending as one. And it gave you the wisdom of that level of paradise, one could say, or that level of a commitment to what the higher state was saying, not a commitment to the personality's view of what must be to be the right kind of person to be in that position. Samson was a definite image of this. When you're in that particular flow, one could say, you are focusing on that flow. You're not focusing on you being important because you're in that flow. You're focusing on that flow. That importance thing doesn't enter into anything. There's no judgment in that. It doesn't go there. Well, 1 second and you're back into the lower levels as soon as your personality orientation is profoundly affected by something and you can't quite get into that other flow, because the flow of the matter world also becomes really strong when those three pillars are acting as one. So the power of will, personalized will, belief will, becomes stronger. And the mind, in its intellectual orientation, is used to being with it, not overly used to yet of being with another state, because it still relates to the lower state as opposed to the middle state. But that flow is strong, that middle state flow is strong, and you are engaging with that to fulfill stronger how you believe things should be. This is an interesting teaching. This is why Samson and Delilah and the temple and these teachings in some of the Old Testaments are marvelous. It's just they're stunning. And they're profound in their teaching. And they're helping us to begin slowly to understand that there is something beyond this business of self-evaluation, even though it is important at these states. And as you know, also superiority and all the rest of the stuff. And judging and all that is strong alignment with these states. No negation lies in that. It's just part of where that higher state brings in energy and enables us to live in this world, relatively speaking, in some manner. But we don't even know it's related to us. It loves us, gives us the intensity, the will to do whatever we want, still gives us more so we can learn by seeing what we're doing. This is very difficult for us. However, still difficult for Samson. He has his hair cut when he's in a kind of after stupor of the joy and the wondrousness of being with Delilah. And that is a natural state. It's not negative at all. Because everything is emphasized when you've been involved with that other state. Everything gets emphasized. So he's emphasized. That state he's in is emphasized. Euphoria. His hair is cut. And in the old traditions, the hair relates to the power of mind, the power of an engagement with a higher state. And this sometimes is discussed ad infinitum. But it's still a belief. And if you don't think beliefs are powerful, because they really are, they're like systems. If you have a composite system of a number of beliefs, you put them all together, you fit them together, and you live your life by them, and they become as rigid as anybody's could be. No negation is there. If we do that, then we apparently get along well in the world. If we don't, not so much. So, making room for it, not necessarily believing a belief you really believe in, is extremely difficult. So he's caught in this. A wonderful being. He's in deep remorse, so he leans. He's leaning because he's hurting. He's judging himself. He's going to have to leave the I am that I am place of reference. He has to leave his link with the garden of still being aware that he's a material person, but linked with a higher state, with God. And so he leans. Now, the power of the mind is phenomenal. The power of judgment, phenomenal. The power of belief, phenomenal. Many people have just been thrown out, cast aside for what they believed, all the way through, in the 14th century, when so much in Europe was going on with respect to changes in belief systems, early parts, way back, it's always been there. Belief, the charter, right? The charter of, if you don't believe this way, you're dumb meat. And people were. In Holland, at least they had a couple of choices. You died, one choice. You were sent off out of the country. Or you found a whole bunch of people in some other place that might agree with you, but people couldn't read your works. They couldn't do anything. You were just thrown out. Here is the keeper of the temple that allows people to go into it, and they are affected by the flow of a high state of a God energy. It affects them. It's like a chamber where people walk into it and they no longer are going to be the same when they walk out of it. Well, it's a belief. In a kind of a way, he is the keeper of the keys, the keeper of the chamber, the keeper of the pathway, of the gate that allows one to walk through that gate into another level for moments in their life, which may slowly affect them in a manner that enables them perhaps to move towards become a keeper of the keys, like the hero they have. But he's filled with remorse. He's dropped down into another state. He doesn't have to be that way. If he could only lift himself up, but his focus is on his truly honest belief that since his hair is now cut, he is no longer worthy. Where all beings are worthy, yet he knows from his point of view, he's made a mistake. You can't make a mistake in the eyes of God. This is a belief. He leans and pushes himself into another state. He deepens through grief, through judgment, through disrespect, honestly, of himself. He drops and he holds himself into those levels that are not respectfully able to lift themselves into that state. He is no longer worthy. This is a real dilemma. It's a different kind of tack than I was going to take, but nonetheless, this is a real dilemma. But in a way, it's there to show us that we, in a kind of a way, when we're on these planes, have every right, by the way, but a tendency to misunderstand the nature of God or a higher state, because we are constantly engaged with actually moving ourselves one way or another based on what we can do and what we can't do, and judging and not really understanding that relationship of the power of love versus the power of personal will. Both are valid. Both are engaging with each other. But we do not really catch that relationship with loving that occurs even if you're the lowest of the low, from the point of view of the matter planes, of course. And because he is the keeper, he knows no one else who can hold those keys and be in those states, because they will also lean on their personalizations, their intellectual orientations, their great need to show their importance. He misses that when he's in. He misses the fact that people grow through those misunderstandings, because eventually, if they don't turn into beliefs, they turn into stimulations of an individual mind to move beyond what they understood before, so that they can learn broader than they had learned previously. If it turns into a belief, you can't do that. You're not open to it. And we, of course, realize, all of us, that it's our tendency to do this, because we are supporting the survival instincts of our proximity, our landscape, our world. And no negation is really there for it. Perhaps we will do this until we decide we're not necessarily interested in doing this as much as we did before, but we will still do it because it is a pathway, a generalized pathway, fundamental. It's been going on for thousands of years, and it's still going on, moving us slowly, one generation to another, hopefully, into an understanding that is deeper, not based only in our mental facility, emotional facility, but in our linking, our experiential facility that links bit by bit into a kind of different state relationship based on a context that relates to the species, as opposed to an individual who becomes important because they can do this. This is part of the movement towards broadening out that link, deepening our willingness to open and go beyond what we understood before, yet not too soon, not before it's regal, not before it's a realization that we actually know, as opposed to a perspective that we present to others. This is not about presenting. Samson didn't present, he lived it. He experienced it. His ache was because he was also experiencing the relationship he had with living in the matter world. Yet, the metaphor between the temple and the keeper of the temple was related to that state where oneness, a oneness with another state could be applied in that concept. When he was there within himself, he was at one with himself. That glow of that plane was conscious in Samson until he decided he was not worthy to have it conscious. Then he put his focus on these planes with what he believed he had to do. So you could actually say he was a trustworthy and honest being relative to his belief and the belief he stood by. He pulled down the pillars. He took his focus out of the relationship with being the keeper of the temple, a high word. He was no longer worthy of it from his point of view, but he was still worthy of it from a higher state point of view, not from a lower state point of view. Just see, if you don't mind, if there's anything that I might have left out. I didn't mention our beliefs are basic ego beliefs, because ego is the thing that we talk through and engage with and attempt to make sense of our world with, as opposed to something to be obliterated. His ego identity with the matter world, his emotion, his intellectual orientations, his personalities, versions of being valued, all slipped away in that next state, when he was in that state, because he was in that state and he was focused on God. And that immobilized him to some degree relative to the lower planes, but he still was in the lower planes to some degree because he was in the lower planes in that next plane that links with the higher plane. I think that's a point that we need to all remember. We're human beings, no matter how able we become. And we're subject to what we think is true, what we think is valuable, what we think is not real, not true, not valuable. We're subject to those because they grow deep in us. And those are the things that we need to have patience and compassion for. And attempt to engage genuinely, not disingenuously, but genuinely with the realization that this is not so simple for us. Otherwise, we devalue our relationship with shifting planes. This is really, no matter what planes you move into, there is a vulnerability about it. Okay, here's a dilemma. Say you all shift into another state. Next thing that might occur, may not occur in you, but might occur, is that you assess the situation because you're still engaging from a lower state into a higher state. You assess the situation and find it important, value. Now you're still in that lower state. You don't notice that. And then you engage in a way that you think important people should engage. And it's like being in the theater. And it's not like that. So many times it's, as some of these folks that I told you that I met have said, you lose the interest in doing that. You lose it so much that you begin to wonder about your humanity sometimes. And you really don't want anybody to know that sense of movement is in there. You want to be with it. You want to be selfish a bit. Be the only one who has that. And then the next feature shows up and you realize you want everyone to be like that. And you also get to know that you're not always like that. Although some people had told me they're always like that. And it's important to listen to them because they're the only ones. That's us. That's us in these planes. That's pretty normal. No negation is involved with that. It's just, why would you do something different than these planes? You wouldn't be recognized. Well, that's the other thing. Some of those other beings that I've told you about, they don't want to be recognized. They're smart. And they're engaged with just basically trying to help because they're kind of the keeper of the keys of the three pillars. I might just note that those three pillars are in virtually almost every belief based on, they call them different names, based on the fact that they believe that they're links that come together eventually and are enabling the individual to grow beyond anything that that individual would ever have understood could be possible. And for different reasons other than what was previously thought by that individual. I find that Samson was, and the whole story, the metaphor, was wondrous. It's wondrous in the Old Testament. He, as being the middle pillar, side by side by these two other pillars, he's both talking externally and he's talking internally. It's a secret. Each one has the potential of three pillars being stimulated all the way through. And in the old traditions, the solar plexus was the most provoking and powerful pillar. And should be thought that way because in the personality, it really is. If it moves straight to the upper centers and is feeding them and making them open, that means the solar plexus may be open on more than one level, maybe 3 levels, 4 levels, 5 levels, 6 levels, 11. It's the thing that we need to allow ourselves to be okay attempting to understand it. And the attempt is important. Perfect understanding is less important. Experiencing is very important. Slow movement, engagement, respectful links with our particular personalized version of development. Real subtle movements towards refinement. Not worrying so much about what other people are doing in relationship to their growth. Looking at it as if you're, with a focus on development, going to be helped because, for a number of reasons, 3 of them. Basically, number 1 is your personality will focus on something, and wherever the personality focuses, more energy comes in because you're doing the focusing. That's that lower power of the will. The next level, when you move into an act of recognition of a flow of love, you become more able to look at you and help you a bit. So you are helping you help you. Sounds strange. Your lens is getting a little clearer, but it's still not clear. You still live here and you engage here. Beliefs affect you. Your personal discoveries affect you. Your personal abilities affect you. Inabilities affect you. Engagements with others. Devaluations, evaluations, everything affects you. Learning how to soften that down means learning how to move into a place that is more receptive to another state, and you have to make some sense of that based on whether you believe this is an alignment with what you want to do or not. This is not so simple. It's very complicated. That's why we have beliefs. We lean into them. As he leaned into those pillars to bring them down, he was bringing them down inside himself. The temple was a metaphor for the external world. Also the internal world, but the external world. He made the decision that humanity was not yet equipped and ready to handle a link up with the Father. It was the Father, everything was the Father. And nobody knew that there was no sexual involvement with this thing at all. There's no gender. It's oneness. Nobody knew this. So we're still learning. And some of these metaphors help us to understand that the wondrousness of this creation, one could say, of a form called humanity, is quite interesting in that it doesn't know of its potential yet. If we do find out, I'm forever hopeful that we can live in the second level of engagement more rather than using the power of that force that is love, yet willing to fulfill what humanity thinks it wants. If we use that power to move into that second level as opposed to maintain a charge of superiority in these levels, that would be pretty interesting. Our track record has not been great, but our ability to attempt to engage with other states, both intellectually, by the way, if you look at nature as an aspect of those, it's an aspect of creation, way of trying to learn through knowing stuff about nature, knowing stuff about ourselves, and ultimately knowing something about other states through experience. Perhaps we can understand the dilemma of Samson and the natural inclination of Delilah, revered on her levels of planes, wanting to be as revered as Samson on his level. And Samson then judging himself so harshly, forgetting that love was the thing that stimulated him to be with Delilah on that lower continuum. And the engagement with the movement could have been back into the temple, perhaps, but it would break the taboos of belief. And he was honored with respect to being the gatekeeper, but it was honorable in the fact that he trusted the rendering of the lower nature about what must be true on the upper natures, on the upper levels. I hope that helps a little bit. If it doesn't, email me and I'll try to make a little bit better sense. The issue is always when you have somebody talking and trying to be helpful, their language and their method of doing things is always relative. So I wish you well. Thank you very much for the question. And we'll now begin to meditate for about an hour.